What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today. I am Sean Murphy, joined by a special guest. He is a host of the Pistons Talk podcast, the host of the Pistons Talk podcast. You see his social media posts absolutely everywhere, all over Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. It is my guy, Anthony, aka Pistons Talk himself. Anthony, what's going on, my guy? Thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
Nothing much, man. Good morning.
Top of the morning to you, man. It's having to talk basketball this early. I'm not super used to it, but I'm glad to be doing it. And if I could be doing it with anyone, it's you. We actually just as we're recording did a podcast about 12 hours ago over on your show on Pistons Talk. So if you haven't watched that, be sure you go and subscribe to Pistons Talk and watch that podcast. But Anthony, for those that aren't familiar with your content somehow, which I feel like would be almost impossible because you're all over social media. Tell people
hmm
more about Pistons Talk and what you're doing over there.
So basically, it's more of like a fan-centric way I cover the Detroit Pistons. I know like you're credentialed, and I try to have fun with the fans, make it all about the fans. Also like to be funny and post memes. Sometimes they get a little edgy, but hey, that's my
What you
know, right? that I like having fun with fans, and I feel like at the end of the day they're the reason why they make it so fun. But if you haven't
Mhm.
followed me, like I'm on Pistons Talk, I like basically every social media platform. I gave up Blue Sky because I didn't feel like running 15 social media pages, but hey, man, we're here.
Blue Sky was a fun week. And then I think everyone got over whatever. I feel like it was like everyone was mad after the election, went somewhere for a minute, and then people were like, there's not enough people here. Blue Sky's a cool app, but I mean, let's just be honest. People just want to go where everybody is. You know what I'm saying? So it
Yeah,
was
it was like Threads for 72 hours. Everyone
oh
was on
yeah.
Threads.
Yeah, Threads was an even shorter period. People were on
Yeah.
there for like a day. And they're like, "Oh wait, there's nothing to this app at all. Let's go back. Let's just go back to Twitter." That's pretty much what happened there. But something that I don't think will be a fad, Anthony, is the play of the Detroit Pistons. Look at that segue. That's what a host does right there. But first, this is from Half Court, where we talk all things Pistons basketball, NBA basketball. If you like that, be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that mother notification bell so you're not missing any of the content. But also, be sure you follow us on social media. You can follow me on X and all other platforms at Sean Half Court. You can follow Anthony on all platforms at Pistons Talk, which if you're watching this podcast, there's no way you're not already following Anthony on Pistons Talk. He's like one of the biggest accounts across social media for Pistons content and one of the best. So be sure you go ahead and following that. But Anthony, let's go ahead and get started. I think this is the first time you've been on this season, which I mean, at the very least, the first time since we actually have some tangible results and some things to talk about. I mean, the Pistons are 17 and 18. We're well into the season, and I think we can say this is exactly who this team is. They've won 6 of their last 7. They just had their best, I think you said their best West Coast road trip since 2008. And they, overall are just really starting to grow and come of age. From your perspective, what have been, just some of your favorite things from this season? And do you think the play that we're seeing of late, do you think do you think that's symbolic of who this group is?
I do think it's symbolic of what this group is and like how they're coached, and probably just like what I like about this group is just the togetherness, the way that they support each other, the way that they have fun. I mean, Cade said it in his last press conference with the media that like it's so easy to play hard for JB Bickerstaff, and it's a lot of fun to play for JB Bickerstaff. And I didn't hear that from Cade when he played for Monty Williams. I didn't hear that from Cade when he was a rookie. No shot at Dwayne Casey, but I just didn't hear that. Like, I just believe that JB, like outside of being a basketball coach, he's just a good human being, and that's what you've heard from like multiple people. Like, I remember when he first got hired, and I immediately watched a Too Old your old like interview with Kevin Love talking about JB Bickerstaff, and he's just like, yeah, man, like he's a connector, great human being. Like those guys are just gonna love playing for him. And like when I heard that, I was just like, good, because I think we could both agree like last year was just a complete disaster, and those guys looked like they wanted to cry each and every night. And they just needed a hug. Like there was like no coaching them up. There was no like helping them out. And I think sometimes we forget how young this basketball team is. Like they're the fourth youngest team in the NBA, and they're playing some of the best basketball that both of us have probably witnessed in like since the Blake Griffin era when they went 41-41. Like,
Yep.
this is a really fun, exciting basketball team, and what makes it even sweeter is like most of these guys, like outside of Cade, they're still on rookie deals, Sean. And that's what makes it scary and fun at the same time, because there's going to be a big move to come whether it's at this trading deadline or over the summer or maybe next year, where they go all in and they try to compete with the Bostons and the New Yorks. Because I think they're actually closer than a lot of people think.
Yeah, I think so too. And, when you talk about just the steps that this team has taken and, you bring up those Blake Griffin, teams and even, before then when they went to the playoffs with Andre Drummond, Reggie Jackson, Tobias Harris, that group, like as fun as those teams were, there was an inherent ceiling to those teams. Like that was about as good as the road was going to get, for all intents and purposes. Whereas with this team, like you said, they're still insanely young. Cade Cunningham is still 22, 23 years old. Jaylen Duren I think he just turned 20 or 21 this season. Asar Thompson is not even 21 yet. Like Jaden Ivey is 21. Like they're all insanely young. So the ceiling of this group is something that the surface that they haven't even scratched yet. And if by the way, if you want to get a good sense of like who JB Bickerstaff like is as a person, you brought up the Kevin Love interview from a couple years ago. For me, this summer watching the Road Tripping podcast with Richard Jefferson and JB Bickerstaff, like that's just a super fun listen, just to showcase JB's personality more, but also like you could just see immediately why he is a success with this group. Like you said, like it's amazing what bringing the joy back can do as far as bringing motivation and cultivating guys coming together. Like this is even though this is like a multi-billion dollar business and people are, fighting for contracts and for money for their families, this is also a game. This is also something that people got into because it's something they love. And like you said, like that Pistons group last year, there was just there wasn't a joy about that team. Whereas now you have Malik Beasley videos in the locker room after the game of guys dancing and just absolutely living their best lives. And there's a confidence to them now. Like we talked last night on your podcast about how, this last week, the 3 wins that they got against Minnesota, Charlotte, and Orlando, those are games that they would have easily lost last year because of the adversity that they faced, that they're equipped to handle now because of JB Bickerstaff and his coaching staff.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And like Malik Beasley is probably one of my favorite Piston signings since Chauncey Billups, and
Without
I'm sure
question.
I'm sure we'll probably get into him later, because it's going to be Chauncey Billups night, as people are probably watching this later on throughout the week, playing the Portland Trailblazers tonight.
Yep.
But like just some of the stuff that like you see the social team puts out, like I've probably seen more fun social media posts from the Pistons social team. Probably my favorite one is like the nicknames, and Malik Beasley calling Jaylen Duren Peanut Head, and him and like Ron Holland are just like laughing, and like the social team like straight up just like put them in like the worst possible position. But you can tell there's like a love-hate relationship between Malik Beasley and Jaylen Duren, because they're always making fun of each other. And I think as guys sometimes, like me and you do it, like the way we show love is we insult each other, and like you could just tell. Like Malik Beasley and Jaylen Duren they probably roast each other in the locker room like every day. Like, get my towel.
Absolutely. This is a group that has to be full of hazing. And listen, I imagine JB's joining along too. I bet it's everybody. So Even some of like the funny nicknames that they have for guys. Like my favorite's Ji the science guy. There's just there's just an energy and a joy to this team that quite frankly, there's a joy behind Detroit basketball that hasn't been there in years. And winning cures a lot of ailments, man. And when they're doing it to this level and to this success, I mean, they got to their win total from last season before New Year's. They already got to their win total from the season before as well. Like this group is well on their way to not only winning, potentially 30 plus games, but being in the conversation for the play-in tournament and possibly a playoff series.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people going into this summer had high expectations. I know I was one of them. I had this team around the 27 to like 30 game win mark.
Me too.
And they might shatter that by maybe January, maybe February. You never really know. Like this team is on pace to win 40 games, Sean. Like that's absolutely insane. Like,
Yep.
I'm sure Tom Gores is ecstatic. I'm sure Trajan Langdon's is like, I did not expect this team to be on pace to win 40 games as we're recording this in January to start off the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. But look, it's amazing, man. It's so much fun to do these podcasts and like come up and just like talk about this basketball team and like all the people and the fans that have suffered through this rebuild. Like a team like this makes it all worth it. Because I know there have been times where, fans just want to punt on Cade Cunningham last year. They're like, is he the guy? Should we trade him? They wanted to punt on Jaden Ivey this summer. They wanted to just, blow it up
Blow
and just have
all
a
up.
win now product. Like you have to be patient with these guys, and you're seeing like what happens when you have a coach that believes in these guys and is developing them and like treating them like real human beings and like caring about them at a human level.
Yeah, for sure. And it also just we talk about the things that JB Bickerstaff has done and what his coaching staff has brought, but it also started with the moves that was made by Trajan Langdon and and his front office, when they came in as well. I mean, people forget like he had to come in and not only did he have to, did he have a couple of weeks to figure out what the Pistons were doing with the draft, what they're doing with free agency. It was also brought to, it was also mandated from ownership that you do a coaching search as well, all within that short period of time. So imagine moving your family and also completely establishing your identity, hiring a staff, getting a free agent, doing a draft, like all of those different things, and to the level of success, that we've seen because the fact that it all happened in such a short time, but a clear, articulate vision was laid out and executed upon. I mean, you brought up Malik Beasley. I don't even think there's any disputing anymore. That was not just the best free agent signing the Pistons have had, since, like you said, since Chauncey Billups. This is the best free agent signing that happened in the NBA this summer, period. Full stop. When you talk about the production to the contract that was given, it is a grand slam contract. Malik Beasley was signed for 1 year, $6 million. And when you're right up there with the most three-pointers made in the league with a guy who's getting paid, 40 or $50 million a year, that's a W.
Yeah, yeah. Like to kind of like piggyback on your point with Trajan Langdon, I think a lot of people just thought that he hired a coach and that was it. Like, no. He had to get a completely new coaching staff. He had to get a completely new medical staff that's revamped, new scouting department. And in the pressers, I'll go on social media and see like what fans are talking about. Like, why is he so tired? Why does he look like he's depressed? I was like, because this man has not slept. Like he had to prepare for the draft, and he said himself, I wasn't watching top 5 picks as I was with New Orleans. But I mean, if he was still in New Orleans, he'd probably be watching top 5 picks, which is like completely kind of like funny. Like
Yeah.
if you kind of think about it, but like Trajan is probably saying like, well, we're not going to have a first round draft pick this year. Good thing I traded for Tim Hardaway Jr. and we have an early second because the way they're playing, Minnesota's going to get that pick. But the job that he's done is just amazing. Like if you think about it, they really didn't add like a whole lot. They added 3 players and 3 grown-ups and 3 veterans that have had key moments this year of winning basketball games. I feel like Malik Beasley just himself has won several Detroit Pistons basketball games, getting them, back into games with this 3-point shooting. And like, I'm sure you had the same conversations I did. Like, I thought the Pistons were going to really have to overpay. Like, a guy that I was zeroing on in was Malik Monk, another Malik.
Yep.
When the Kings, extended him extremely early in free agency, gave him, I think, upwards of $80 million. I was like, oh, okay, so that's what it's going to cost. That's what it's going to cost for, a good three level scorer. And then like you see Malik Beasley signed for 6, and then you see Gary Trent signed for like even less. I believe. I'm like, okay, what the hell's going on? Like,
Yep.
I thought these guys were good, but like a lot of these teams are just so damn scared of the new CBA and the apron taxes. But
Yep.
I think it kind of benefited the Pistons because getting a shooter like a Malik Beasley, who's been a high volume 3-point shooter throughout his career, bro, like $6 million for that contract. I feel like the Pistons are stealing at this point.
Yeah, it is highway robbery. It is a heist without question. And you talk about the reason why it happened. It was because Trajan Langdon practiced patience. He let free agency play out. And like you said, with the way that the market played out, there were a lot of guys this summer who were who kind of drew a short straw for all intents and purposes, because like you said, teams just aren't giving out contracts to the same extent that they are anymore, because the flexibility that this salary cap does not give teams is something that, you have to love your team if you're locked in. And it's hard to love your team when only one team gets to win it all. So, it's kind of a tricky thing. And, with the level that Malik's playing at, going into this summer, now it's going to become a story of what happens there. I imagine that re-signing Malik and keeping him in Detroit is going to be a priority. But also I think what people, need to consider as well is Malik clearly likes it in Detroit too. I mean, he's from Michigan. He grew up, a Pistons fan. He knows what it means. So, I don't think it's going to be very hard to make that happen. But I mean, to me, it's almost a priority now, just with, what he's meant on and off the court for this team.
Yeah, I remember before the season started, there was a quote. I forget who it was from. I'm pretty sure it was from Amar Sinko from the Free Press, and he had
Yep.
said that I'm trying to bring that Detroit Pistons basketball back. And like when
Mhm.
Pistons fans hear that, like Monte Morris said the same thing like a year previously, and it didn't happen. And a lot of times with fans, when you say stuff like that, they're like, cool, talk's cheap, show me what you're about, and maybe I'll come out to a game, maybe I'll come support you. And I think he's done a pretty good job of backing up his words. I think his actions have actually spoken louder than his words. And I know the Pistons aren't a 500 basketball club right now, but the way in which they're playing, over their last like 11 games, being winners, 8 out of the last 11 games, like this isn't a small sample size anymore. They've done it for a couple of weeks where they're playing really sound, smart basketball. They're taking care of the basketball. The defense, I've thought for, the second half of the Charlotte game, holding them at 31 points. That's Detroit Pistons basketball. On a back-to-back when I didn't think the energy would be the highest, they completely just BTA'd to Minnesota, like straight
Yeah.
up. Like that was just an ass whooping. And Lions took care of business last night, so it was a Minnesota sweep. So I mean, like you love to see it if you're a Detroit sports fan.
Getting cold in Minnesota, man.
Twin City
Better stay
Belt.
off better stay up off the streets if you can't take the heat. But like just hit the like we talked about this as well last night, but Malik Beasley, like he's well on his way of shattering like all of the Pistons shooting records in a season. He should be in the 3-point contest, but to me, it's also just like the 3-level scoring. I mean, this is a guy who, you talk about the efficiency that he's been able to have from the 3-point line throughout his career. The fact that he's keeping that at 9 threes a game is just something that we haven't seen much in the league, let alone in a Pistons uniform. And then, you just talk about the level of contributions you've been able to get from a rookie in Ron Holland. I mean, this is a draft. I mean, we talk about draft classes extensively, Anthony, and this is a draft class that everyone agreed was not a good one. It was not going to be a fruitful one for teams. Like if you can get a starter, it's a miracle. And Ron Holland has come in and to me has kind of said to hell with that. I can play. And listen, I don't know what his ceiling is. I mean, he's 19 years old with all of his school with all his skills and attributes. To me, it's pretty clear that the ceiling is pretty high for him. But I mean, Anthony, like we're seeing improvements thus far. He's shooting 41% from three since December 1st, and the guy's a hound each and every night he plays. What have you made of Ron Holland, and what exactly do you think is a ceiling for someone like that?
So kind of before we get into the ceiling, like doing the pre-draft stuff, I don't know about you, like that's something that I really dig into, and I went and listened to old interviews with Trajan when he was doing his pre-draft stuff, and I was like, okay, there's two prospects that he'll probably draft, and Ron was one of them. And I was just like, Trajan loves wings, like that's his MO. Like you go and like look at what the Pelicans drafted. Like they drafted Dyson Daniels, who's having a phenomenal season with the Hawks right now. And I was like, Ron makes so much sense for the Pistons. And I know a lot of people, like when we drafted him, like they wanted the Dalton Connects. They wanted like other, win now pieces that could contribute right away. And the shooting, I think, was always a question with him when I was watching games. But like the shot, when you watch him, it doesn't look completely broken. He actually kind of has a really nice like form for a
Yep.
player. And I was like, okay, I think there's something there. And I kind of viewed him as a shooting guard, small forward archetype. I think that's more of his natural position at the end of the day. But in terms of just like potential and the type of player he can become, like I see a lot of young DeMar DeRozan with some defense. Like the way he moves in the paint, the way he finishes around the rim. I just really, really like him as a basketball player. And like, I think coming off the bench for him is a perfect fit because there's not a whole lot of pressure on him to start. He gets to go up against second rotation guys. And on most nights, Sean, he's dogging them. Like preseason, he's fighting for a loose ball with Royce O'Neal. Shout out. I don't know if you saw that he got married the other day. Everyone's been talking about that. But like, I don't know if you see the wedding pictures. It's pretty freaking wild. If you guys have time, just like look up Royce O'Neal and get a good laugh.
Oh
But like,
boy. Oh boy.
Ryan Holland, like to kind of get back on that, man. Like,
Yep.
I think home run pick. You talk to any guys doing like draft stuff. I remember talking to Hoop Intellect, and he said that he's like number one on my board, and the Pistons got him at 5, and a lot of mock drafts had him out of the lottery because of the G League Ignite, and like that wasn't really his fault because if you watched any of those games, it was like him and Matas Bazelis and a bunch of other guys that probably had no business being on that roster.
There's a
Like
reason why the program got shut down after last season, and it was not Ron Holland and Matas Bazelis.
No, and like they went on a losing streak too. They only won 2 games all year. Like imagine how Ron feels going from like a 2-win team to a 14-win team, and he's probably like, shit, like I didn't even work out for this team. Like, are we gonna suck again? But like I can guarantee you, like he has no regrets of getting drafted by the Detroit Pistons. You can tell he loves it here. Probably my funnest like Ron Holland moment was the Kings game. Pistons social team again, like caught them. So like, man, they mad as hell right now. Like I just love Ron Holland, man. I think the ceiling's incredibly high. Like if he can become a two-way wing on this basketball team, man, like you're talking about a guy that could average 15 to 20, lock up your best player, and then talk shit. Like Pistons fans would absolutely love Ron Holland.
Oh, talk about the funniest moment of the season. Talk about when Ron Holland squared up with Jordan Clarkson for the ejection. Like he just out of nowhere, like he just got full out ready to go. And it was just one of those moments where obviously you don't want to get your player ejected, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. But in retrospect, it was hilarious. So yeah, no, And I think there's something to be said, by the way, about, Ron Holland came from a situation of, if anyone could understand what the Pistons went through last season, it's Ron Holland, because of of all of the losing that he had to go through with the Ignite. I think there's something to be said about the fact that, he's been able to bring an energy, and there's a mutual motivation, to kind of right that ship and turn things around. And, like you said, like Trajan talked about pretty openly at the draft, that agents were not very cooperative with wanting players to come and work out for Detroit, which, listen, when you lose 28 games in a row, I don't know if I'd want my players working out for you either. But I don't think that's going to be a problem going forward, because, the prospect of a guy coming into the league and being able to be put on a team with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and all these guys. I mean, when you talk about one of the, like, I think there's a legitimate conversation to be had now of, if you're talking about the best young cores in basketball. I think with the level of play and the ascension we've seen this season, I think the Pistons have to be entered into that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if they keep this pace up and they're fighting for that playoff spot, I mean, like, who's to say that they can't have like and I know this probably sounds like a wild, like, galaxy brain hot take of, like, who's to say they can't be like a OKC? Because you look at where OKC's at, you look at SGA and the superstar he is. I mean, you could argue Cade Cunningham has been a top 15 player in the NBA this season. Like, just the way
Yeah.
he's been playing basketball. Like, Cade, I think, has another leap to stardom. Who's to say that the Pistons can't have an OKC Thunder type of just resurgence of being a fun up and coming young team that is at the top of the Eastern Conference? Because it, like, outside of Boston, New York, and Cleveland, like, who's the fourth best team really?
Yeah, it's a total toss up. I mean, like, when Orlando's healthy, it's probably them, but, like,
Yeah.
even then, it's just every single one and their mother has a broken orbital bone for some reason over there. Jalen Suggs, just his back, I mean, the back injury was brutal. That was kind of flaring up really bad in the Pistons game too. So that was not a total surprise. But they just talk about a team that can't catch a break at all. Poor Magic. But even then, it's like, after that, it's like Milwaukee's in the conversation somewhat, but, like, they're getting older. Atlanta's just kind of been who they are. I mean, I love Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson, but as much as Trey Young touches the basketball, I still don't necessarily love what's going on there. And then, yeah, it's after that, it's a total crapshoot, man. But if you would have told me this season that Detroit Pistons had a better record than the Philadelphia 76ers, I would have not believed you. I know that to be a fact.
Yeah, I mean, you got to trust the process, right?
I mean, they might have to be finding a whole new process to trust right now with what's going on in Philly. Real
Yeah, I
quick,
know.
real quick before we, because I do kind of want to talk a little bit about, like, Jaden Ivey and that kind of stuff. I do want to talk for a second about Minnesota, because I'm not sure about you, but watching that Pistons game the other night, obviously, as much as you focus on how impressive the Pistons played and the performance there, Cade Cunningham had a 40-point game. Anthony Edwards scored 53 points, and it didn't mean a damn thing. And they lost by double digits. I mean, you told me Minnesota looked like a play-in team with Anthony Edwards. And quite frankly, it's impossible to not look at this situation and start to see the remnants of what happened with Kevin Garnett back in the day, where this team got towards the top of the mountain once and then never got back there. This is a pretty bad situation, Anthony. What do you think about what's going on in Minnesota?
I think it goes deeper than like what the team is constructed. I think if you followed Minnesota at all, and I kind of like got into that rabbit hole talking to Timberwolves fans over the summer, because before we hired Trajan Langdon, I was really interested in their president of basketball operations and like what
Of
was
course,
happening there. And I was just
Tim
like, well,
Connolly.
yeah, Tim Connolly. I was like, huh. I said maybe the Pistons could go after him. And a lot of Timberwolves fans told me they weren't sure if he was going to come back because of the ownership group. Like, if you follow the Timberwolves, like, Alex Rodriguez and his team have been trying to just have a clean swap of taking over the basketball team, and that has not been the case. It's been a thing where they're going to court, there's lawsuits, like Alex Rodriguez and his team bought the team, and then the owner is suing them because he said, no, I want more. So just
Yeah, he
from
pretty
like,
much realized he sold the team for such a low value with what they actually were worth and how much and like NBA teams were rising in value. He pretty
mhm.
much realized he effed up and he's trying to do everything he can to get some more dollars out of it.
Yeah, so like when you talk to Timberwolves fans and like the ownership group is dysfunctional, and then the ownership group had a very expensive team last year. Now, granted, that was a young, fun Western Conference team that I think a lot of people they're like, well, Anthony Edwards and Carl Anthony Towns and like these guys are fun. They're young. Like this could be a Western Conference team to dominate the West for years to come. And the Carl Anthony Towns trade, I think, just threw everyone off. Like Cat didn't even
Yeah.
know he was getting traded. But we talked about it earlier. Like the new CBA, a lot of these teams do not want to get into that second apron tax, and they don't want to pay the second apron tax. Like, and
Yeah.
I think that's a big reason why Cat was moved, because if you look at his
Yep.
contract, he signed a really big, lucrative deal. And they decided, hey, we'll take Julius Randle because we want to kind of get under the tax, and we still believe we have a superstar in Anthony Edwards, which they do. But to your point, the body language was piss poor. It felt like it was just Anthony Edwards and Dante DiVincenzo that were actually giving effort
Yep.
versus the Detroit Pistons. I think if I'm Minnesota, I'm taking calls on Julius Randle and seeing what I can get to try to save my season, because I like players like Naz Reid. I love Naz Reid. He's like one of my favorite non-Piston players. I was really high on him in the pre-draft stuff. Like I wanted the
He's a
Pistons to
stud.
draft him. Yeah, he's a really good player. Like Jaden McDaniels. I love Jaden McDaniels. Like really, really good wing. And it's funny, every time he guarded Cade, he had to follow him to stop him. Like that just shows you like how good of a player Cade Cunningham is. But Minnesota, man, like I think they're definitely gonna have to be active at the trade deadline, retool a little bit to try to save their season, because no way this is a 10 seed Western Conference team with having a young superstar like Anthony Edwards. And you brought up the point of Kevin Garnett. It's kind of looking like that because the ownership group is just not on the same page, and I think the players can feel it. Chris Finch is a hell of a coach. Like
Yep.
I just want to say that, but you can tell that there's a lot of divide in the locker room. Anthony Edwards is very frustrated with getting doubled. Kind of reminds you of Devin Booker before you got to play with the Chris Paul or Kevin Durant. There's so much similarities in like what Anthony Edwards is going through and what Devin Booker currently went through as a player. If you kind of want to just kind
Yep.
of match and like talk about like up and coming young superstar shooting guards.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I don't think Anthony Edwards is gonna be as patient as Devin Booker was with the Suns and with that situation, especially, Anthony Edwards getting that early taste of playoff success and being, in that limelight. I don't think he's a guy that's gonna wait very long or wants to wait very long to be back in those conversations. And, like I like trading a Karl Anthony Towns was it was inevitable for this team when they made the Rudy Gobert move, and if they didn't win a championship, like, and that was their only option in any significant way of changing their roster and giving themselves flexibility. And listen, Rudy Gobert, he won a Defensive Player of the Year award in a Minnesota Timberwolves uniform. Now has won 4 of them. We all know, the tutelage he has as a defensive player, but I think it's hard to argue, even though they made that Western Conference Finals run, it's hard to argue that that move hasn't strapped that team going forward and hasn't put them in a more difficult situation. And they essentially doubled down on it by both trading Cat and giving Rudy Gobert an extension as well. So, I and you talk about like with Julius Randle, not only is he just not the player that Karl Anthony Towns is, He's just also not the locker room presence either. Like, I don't think it's a very difficult conversation of if you could go get a drink with a person between Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle. I'm sorry, but I don't think many people are choosing Julius Randle. I just
Yeah.
don't.
And I think the fit is actually like a bad fit with Minnesota because you look the way they play. Like Anthony Edwards loves to shoot a lot of 3-pointers and he leads the league in 3-point makes. And that's not part of Julius Randle's game. Julius Randle is more of a low post player. And like he didn't score his first basket against the Pistons until the third quarter. And like I was kind of surprised. I was like, really? That's his first basket? But like I just think the fit is terrible. Danny Ainge is probably laughing every day looking at the Western Conference standings, seeing the Timberwolves are just slipping and slipping because those draft picks are going to be really, really good.
Yep.
The Knicks are probably like, holy crap, we just got capped for that. Really? Like,
Uh-huh.
and I'm so happy that the Knicks did not trade Julius Randle to the Pistons because that was the thing that almost happened. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
thank God we dodged a bullet because his body language in a loss is not something you probably want in a young, rebuilding Detroit Pistons locker room.
Yeah. I don't think so either. And, I know people talk about, like they like Vegas odds or whatever, like people talk about like the next potential destination for a Julius Randle. I just don't think Detroit makes very much sense. And I don't think Trajan Langdon is going to be the type of executive where he's going to be desperate to go and acquire talent and just go get a name and, figure it out later. I think, like talking about like what the Pistons could do, like moving forward. I don't know if a Julius Randle type guy, is necessarily, in their cards. But, I think when you talk about just the trajectory of, you talk about like what the Pistons can do moving forward, and, they're not very far off. I agree with that. Like, I think, I don't think it's very untenable for this Pistons team to go get a playoff win this year.
That would be huge, man. Like I think the last time they won a playoff game, I was still in high school, and I
Yep.
haven't been in high school in like 12 years.
The last
So
year they won a playoff game was when they traded Chauncey Billups for Allen Iverson, and Chauncey Billups is now going to be coaching against the Pistons with his own team. Like, just to give an idea of how long it's been, Chauncey
yeah,
Billups is now a coach.
I saw someone on Twitter. It's just like, what's a New Year's resolution you want the Pistons to have in 2025? And I was like, stop selling Allen Iverson red alternative jerseys inside of LCA, please. For the love of God. Like, I get you're trying to make money at the end of the day if you're the Detroit Pistons, but like, man, like anything Allen Iverson to me is just voodoo bad luck. Like, I'm a conspiracy theorist person, and I think if you're still selling jerseys from like one of the worst starts of an era of Pistons basketball, you got to get rid of anything Allen Iverson. Um, in my opinion, anyways. Like as a player, I loved AI in Philly, but in Detroit, I absolutely hated it because I didn't really think that you had to trade Chauncey Billups. Chauncey just wanted to get paid, and Joe Dumars obviously didn't want to pay him.
Yeah.
And that trade, you've got to reflect on it. I think that was the downfall of just Detroit Pistons basketball because before Cade Cunningham, I mean, like Sean, you can go down the rabbit hole. Like look how many point guards like we tried to replace Chauncey with, and it took us all the way up until the 2021 draft to get a franchise guard.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, when you talk about like, there's no question that was the point that it all turned because they went from going to work to we're talking about practice. Like if you're talking about the antithesis of going to work, it's that type of attitude, for lack of better terms. Like Allen Iverson, as great of a player as he was, that wasn't his personality. That wasn't his, his way of life. And so, like ever since that point, like you said, it's just been trying to cycle guys through. And for a moment, it looked like Brandon Jennings could have been that guard of the future, and then his Achilles tore. And then Reggie Jackson, it looked like for a brief second he could have been the guard of the future, and then his ankles said, "Nope." And it was a long tumultuous road. And like not only had it been since then, since the Pistons had gotten that type of guard, it had been 50 years since the Pistons had gotten a number one overall pick. And we have very much seen over the last few years how lottery luck can be a very brutal road to rely on. And so when you do win the number one overall pick, you got to make it count. And I know people talked about, like I remember Troy Weaver saying, "Oh, I don't think there's a generational prospect, in this class. I don't think there's a consensus number one overall guy." I think Cade's looked like a generational prospect over this last month or so. And we've talked about, a lot of people covering the Pistons. Just give this guy some support and see what he can do with it. And now, like you said, like a little bit ago, Cade Cunningham's looking like a top 15 player. I mean, I think there's a legitimate case to be made if he keeps up at this pace. Cade Cunningham should be considered for an all NBA team this year.
I think he should, and I'll do you one better. I think he's the best point guard in the Eastern Conference. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a debate. I mean, you could have debates with Jalen Brunson, with Cade, sure. I think you look at Damian Lillard. I don't, at this advanced age, even though he's still, putting up buckets, but he has a Giannis Antetokounmpo next to him to make his life a hell of a lot easier. I mean, like, no shot at like the players that the Pistons currently have, but Cade has to do so much to put this team in a position to win offensively. And you see what happens when you put competent role players around him. What happens when you put a superstar next to Cade Cunningham? What happens then? Like,
Yeah.
does he get you 12, 13 assists a night? Because there are some nights where I feel like he could easily have 15 assists if his teammates just hit their open shots. Like, just some of the feeds that he makes are just like next level. And, having like high flyers like an Asar Thompson, who feels like he's just going to be on ESPN every night with some of
Yep.
the lobs that he catches. Like, would not surprise me any way, shape, or form if we start having these who's the best point guard in the NBA conversations with Cade Cunningham
Yeah.
going into this season and next, because even LeBron and KD are saying like, yeah, man, like that kid has got a good head on his shoulders. He's 23. He's going to be a problem for years to come.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing LeBron, agreed with Cade on, he actually said last night, Cade said it right. The Thompson twins are different. And, just the limited play that we've seen from Asar Thompson, over the course of this season, it really feels like over the last, I feel like the Minnesota game was really in particular kind of a launching point of Asar kind of starting to really get his groove back, really get his comfort back. And, you just talk about the potential of him and Cade, and when Ivy comes back, like this is a team that gives teams sweats right now. And so, like just thinking about what Asar Thompson would look like in a playoff series and him guarding teams' best players, like this is a group that's made to grind out basketball games. And just the when you talk about the feeling of a year ago of looking at the schedule and going, when does this team get a win? To now, you look at the schedule and you legitimately can see this team winning each and every night. Like talk about a culture difference, a momentum shift, like all those different things. It's just a complete and utter 180 that they've noticed. But I want to touch on Jaden Ivey and obviously before his injury, he was playing really good basketball. Do you think that with his extension talks looming and coming up, how much do you think this injury actually affects that? Because I think with the fibula, I don't necessarily think with the injury that he had that it does affect it much, because when he does come back, I do think he should look a lot like the Jaden Ivey we've seen before. And with kind of what we've seen this season, I think the Pistons should start to feel more and more comfortable of the prospect of signing Jaden Ivey to a significant extension.
I think if it was a ruptured Achilles or an ACL tear, then I would have those concerns of, well, maybe you can get a discount on Jaden Ivey and kind of see
Yep.
like what's there. But when we heard the news from Pistons PR and Shams Charania later last week, um, it kind of gave you reassurance that it wasn't too bad of a break and he'll make a recovery. And he had surgery right away and he's already rehabbing as we're talking right now. I'm pretty confident that he will get extended. I think that it wouldn't surprise me if you see anywhere from 100 million to 130 million with a
Yep.
contract extension with Jaden Ivey, and I think he's deserved it.
Yep.
And to kind of get to your point, like so many conversations have been had among Pistons fans of fit and can Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey play together. I think this season broke a lot of those concerns because there have been games this year where Cade Cunningham has taken over, hitting game-winning shots against Atlanta. And there have been games this season where Cade Cunningham was out and Jaden Ivey hits a game winner against Toronto, hits a game win tying shot against the Kings. If you kind of crunch the numbers, like Jaden Ivey is the Detroit Pistons' best clutch player when you
Yep.
just crunch the numbers. And like I think these two are so different that it kind of goes together. Like
Mhm.
they're not the same type of player. They're not when you talk about archetypes, like Cade is really methodical, point forward. Jaden Ivey's just a really, really talented, athletic. You could call him a combo guard that likes to run in transition, loves attacking the basket, and now he is scoring at all three levels. And we
Yep.
talked about Fred Vincent a little while ago. Like a lot of people are just thinking Fred Vincent only works with like Asar and Ron, but like you could argue that Fred Vincent has actually helped Jaden Ivey shot a little bit because I feel like his shot seems a little bit faster this season. And obviously,
Yep.
Jaden Ivey, as a basketball player, works his tail off. He's one of the first people out. If you go to a Pistons game early and you're sitting down, you're watching players work out, he's one of the first players out there just working
Every
on stuff
time.
that you wouldn't really expect. And like, talking to media members like on my podcast, like they all say like Jaden Ivey's like the first one in, last one out. So no doubt in my mind he'll come back from this injury better than ever because I know the work ethic that he has as a basketball player is top notch. And just him as a player, I felt really bad with that injury because he was playing some of the best ball of his career. I know it was a small sample size, but like that game against Phoenix, man, like I was like, holy crap, like what happened to Jaden Ivey? And someone's like, oh, he's healthy. He was going through his whole injury, but I mean, like he was stealing balls. He was going at Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal and just giving them fits and just complete dog out there. But like, I don't think Pistons fans should be too worried about Jaden Ivey, coming back because I think just the type of player that he is, uh, Pistons fans should be feeling very excited and proud of like what this team could become. And you might have that next great Detroit Pistons backcourt of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey.
Yeah, I think the injury would have been the only thing that would have given this team any pause. And if you needed any idea of how much Jaden Ivey, the player and the person, meant to this team, then look no further than when he did go down. Because the emotion, just how much they cared for Jaden, not only as a player but just as a person, just how much he means, to this locker room. He's someone that's beloved within the organization, and it's easy to see why, just like you said with the work ethic. Every single coach he's had, every single front office that's been put in place has said the same thing. If anything, Jaden Ivey almost works too much. We almost have to send him home at times, like, and I think there's almost no question that that's the type of approach he'll have with his rehab process as well. And you talk about the shooting improvements. I mean, he's shooting 41% from three this season on 5+ attempts. Like we talked about, like it felt like if he could get to high 30s, that would be a massive win. And coming into the league, the questions were, could he have a reliable 3-point shot? The answer's already a resounding yes. Like teams can no longer disrespect him on the 3-point line. On the contrary now. And you talk about his athleticism, his speed, his just all of the things that you look at in a young player and go, who could potentially who could potentially become an all-star. Jaden Ivey has all those traits. And the any questions of how he fits alongside Cade Cunningham have been squalled as well. And now that we're seeing those two players be staggered, like that's a big reason why this team has taken the step that they've taken. So if there's any player that they feel comfortable with extending this offseason, without question, it should be Jaden Ivey. Now, Jaylen Duren, on the other hand,
Hmm.
that still to me is very much up in the air. And listen, to Jaylen Duren's credit, he's had a good last couple of games against Charlotte, or against Orlando as well, and a little bit to an extent against Minnesota. But what in your opinion does the future look like for Jaylen Duren? Because to me, it's pretty murky. I wonder what the odds are of him being in a Pistons uniform to start next season. Like, does Trajan Langdon, do they kind of eliminate those conversations? Do they trade him and go get a center, that they can have going forward? Do they try and keep him and see, if one more year in the system, and with that fire lit under him of the restricted free agency looming? What do you think from your perspective? What do you think should be the approach the Pistons have with Jaylen Duren?
Well, I think I have to be very careful of like how I say this because I know Jaylen Duren has a huge hive in the Pistons community, and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. He's 21 years old.
Yep.
We get that. We understand it. Incredibly young. But this is his third NBA season, and I think if you were to go and watch him as a rookie versus him now, the effort isn't the same. And then you kind of have to go, it's like, okay, what happened from his rookie year to his third season? Well, Monty Williams happened. And I thought in his second season, Monty Williams never held him accountable. And a lot of the bad habits that he developed under Monty have leaked over into this season, Sean.
Yeah.
I think the defense this year has been hit or miss. There have been times where he's locked in and focused, but there are also been times where he's just unplayable most nights.
Yep.
Not crashing the glass, letting smaller guards or smaller wings, beat him to offensive rebounds, not protecting the paint whatsoever, and then like pointing at his teammates, asking him, why didn't you defend that guy? At the end of the day, he's 21 years old. He is extension eligible this summer. I don't think the Pistons even offer him an extension. I just don't.
No.
I think if you're Trajan, you look at what you have in Isaiah Stewart and you like what you have. You looked at what you have in Paul Reed, and Paul Reed is 25 years old. He's on a 1-year deal. I think if I'm the Pistons and I want to take that next step to get better, I'm looking at a completely different archetype of center. I'm not looking for a rim running lob threat center that play with this basketball team. Now, obviously, Cade loves having a lob threat like a Jaylen Duren, and I understand that. But I think if I'm a Piston fan, I'm looking at stretch fives. I'm looking at Miles Turner. I'm looking at a Brook Lopez, even at his advanced age. I think if you were to get a stretch five next to Cade Cunningham, this offense opens up so much. And I like Jaylen Duren as a basketball player. I'm sure he's a really good kid. But I think if he doesn't start picking it up defensively, Sean, over the second half of the season, his future, I think, is going to be a big question mark. And Trajan's going to have a lot of tough decisions to make. I don't think he gets traded this deadline. I think if there was a move to be made, it probably will be this summer when, he can sit down with his front office and kind of just devise a plan of like what they think free agency is going to be like for them. What are they going to do with Malik Beasley? What are they going to do with Tim Hardaway Jr. if he makes it past the trading deadline? Like, what's the future with Tobias Harris? Like, do we bring Paul Reed back? Like, I think there's a lot of conversations to have about different players on this basketball team that they probably want to see what happens. But for him right now, he's still on a rookie deal. If you're the front office, like, just let him go to the restricted free agency and kind of prove it. Like, prove to us that you can be a two-way center. Because I think a lot of people, when he got drafted, they were calling him baby Dwight Howard. Like, they were stamping him as like a defensive player of the year candidate when that hasn't really been the case in his first three seasons. Now, obviously, it's not his fault in terms of coaching. Having three coaches in 3 years probably messes with your mental. And like, he still talks to Monty Williams. He still has a relationship with Monty Williams. I think some people don't like understand that. Like, a lot of these players still have, relationships with their old coaches. Like, I know JD still talks with Mark Bryant. He was working with Mark Bryant in the summer when he already took a coaching job with the New York Knicks. Like, it's kind of wild, but like, To kind of answer your question, I know I kind of like rambled on for a little bit. I don't think that the Pistons know what they want to do yet, because if they were out on him, they probably would have traded him this summer and just kind of thrown the bag at Nick Claxton, probably.
Yeah, I still think there's, there's enough talent there to continue, the evaluation process to a certain extent, as long as you can. They're still winning basketball games, but like you said, like just objectively speaking, it's not just the eye test. If you look at the numbers too, in a lot of ways, he's kind of regressed back to where he was his rookie season, and the improvement and the ascension that you want to see from a guy in his third season, it hasn't happened. And, there's you can look at a lot of the different reasons. In my opinion, like, yes, the coaching thing is certainly a factor, although you also look at what, like what he's being asked to do by each coaching staff. I don't think they're radically different whatsoever as far as the way that they want him to play. Now, the coaching that he's been given, the way that to go about doing it could all be radically different. I absolutely acknowledge that. But it's not like they've all wanted him to play different positions or to do different roles within the team. They've all wanted him to be a rim running big who could protect the paint. Like that's a pretty consistent thing that's been asked of Jaylen Duren to do. Now, you can kind of like you said, you can look at a lot of the different reasons and all those things. I personally think he's been overly invested in the development of his offensive game. I've been a proponent of you could literally just stay as is offensively, and he could be an all-star just if he became that guy defensively and combine that. Like I truly believed that's where his talent was. And there's a reason why he was being asked to come and work with the USA select team over the last couple of years as well. Like this is a guy who's recognized for his talent. But having said that, if there's anyone that needs that fire lit, and kind of needs that prove it year, I think it is someone like Jaylen Duren because the the whether or not he can reach that talent or reach that potential, in a Pistons uniform, we don't entirely know. But the only way I think it's going to happen is under a pressure cooker type of situation. And I think if there's anyone that restricted free agency would really benefit, I think it's someone like Jaylen Duren. And to me, it's kind of like similar to like a DeAndre Ayton type of situation where you see the talent, you see the potential, but it's like whether or not they're going to put in that consistent work or that consistent effort. And, you know, DeAndre Ayton is, like you said last night, he's having a good season and starting to bounce back in Portland. Maybe it's a change of scenery that would force Duren to grow up. But nonetheless, it's just, I've been as big a proponent of his ceiling as anybody, in this community. But when it just hasn't been there at a certain point, you just have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and I think JB as a coach is the right coach for him to learn
Yep.
under. And I mean, there have been times where he just says, "I'm throwing Isaiah Stewart up there for the next 20 minutes because you're just unplayable right now," or even Paul
Yep.
Reed to an extent. Um, I know some Pistons fans have been like really like just sit him for a week and just like start Paul Reed and have Isaiah Stewart and let him watch from the bench so he can kind of learn and like see to what to expect out of this coaching staff and what JB wants out of him. I don't think I would be that drastic, but um, I think Jaylen Duren could be a good player. I just don't know if it's going to be in Detroit Pistons uniform. And that
Right.
happens in the NBA.
Yep.
It definitely happens. Like we've seen it as Pistons fans. Like we draft players and they don't get a whole lot of playing time, or they do get playing time, and they don't produce the way that we think that they could, and they go to another team and they kind of blossom. Like
Yep.
I think JD has had every opportunity to be a starting center. I know they're still trying to develop him and dribble handoff offenses, which I think he's gotten a little bit better at, but I think defensively is where most of us have our gripes with him. Offensively, we know what we're getting. We're getting a rim running big, a lob threat can, set up the offense a little bit. I think his screens still need a little bit of work because he has a tendency to move on screens, and it usually comes into a turnover if the ref sees it.
At least
But
one or two moving screen fouls per game. You can almost pencil that in once or twice in the middle of a second or third quarter.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a lost art in today's game is just setting screens. But kind of getting back into the defense, like you had mentioned it, like we don't really need you to keep, developing your offensive game. If you can, cool. But I mean, your offensive game would have to be on the par of Alperen Sengun for I think the Pistons organization to even consider giving you a long-term rookie max extension. I think defensively for him, it's just the little things. Like I know recently he's been blitzing more, kind of like how Paul Reed's out there. Paul Reed is probably one of the best blitzers as a big on this basketball team. I noticed that Jaylen Duren has been blitzing more, but the problem with that is sometimes I've noticed that the guard is behind him and he's on his way to the basket because he didn't process the play right. But I don't want to get on him too much. I think that there's a lot of talent and he's still very raw, but I think defensively, if he wants to be a Detroit Piston, he's got to work on his defensive part of his game. And I will say, over the home stretch last week, I thought he did a much better job of playing defense. There were multiple defensive possessions where he was protecting the rim, blocking shots, telling a kid to take his LaMelo Ball jersey off after he had the game-winning block.
Yep.
But hey, man, I love JD. It's just defensively, man, we need a little bit more out of you at the end of the day. And I think, he probably knows that. He knows that he's got to work on his defensive game at the end of the day. Still only 21 years old. Like maybe he puts together another great week, Pistons basketball going up against like DeAndre Ayton, Nick Claxton. You got Golden State, and I think Yoko Pirtle, who absolutely destroyed him on the glass in one of the games this season. But when JD played the Raptors in their previous game, he did a really good job of containing him. So I think at the end of the day, really young player, and I think he's still kind of learning the game of basketball at the NBA level.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And I think a lot of times people hear this type of talk about a player and they're like, oh, well, why is there this agenda against my favorite player? But in reality, it's just knowing the potential and the capability of what's there and the certain development trajectory that you need in order to make that type of commitment to a star. It just hasn't been there. So it's just when you talk about the storylines and the things that are looming for this Pistons team, that has to be towards the top of the list because Jaylen Duren is one of those, he has been seen as one of those figure pieces, one of those things that that this team, was building around. And when you're talking about, the evaluation process and how, how different executives feel about different players, like this isn't like Trajan Langdon, he didn't draft Jaylen Duren. This isn't his player. So, for all intents and purposes, I don't think he's nearly as tied to, anyone on this roster as a Troy Weaver would have been. So, I think a lot of this year is just Jaylen Duren evaluating and looking at how players act and what they're doing in, behind closed doors and how they're looking in games. And, to me, it's like when you look at, well, what type of evaluations is he going to have? We know for a fact what we're seeing on paper right now with Jaylen Duren. So it's just, when you talk about looming storylines, that has to be at the top of the list.
Can I tell you a funny story I heard about Jaylen Duren during the preseason?
Go right on ahead.
Because it relates to one of the new two-way guys, Tolu Smith. So during the preseason game, I don't know if you remember, Tolu Smith broke his hand.
Yep.
So he's got his hand all wrapped by the medical staff, and I think the Pistons won that game, if I remember correctly. And Jaylen Duren sees that his hand's all wrapped, and he was just like, "Where's my towel, Rook?" And his hand's like iced up, all broken. He's like, "No one give a shit about your broken ass hand. Go get my towel." And I guess like Tobias Harris got in it and everything. Like a reporter told me that off camera, and I was just like, "Bro, like that is the funniest thing I've ever heard." Like just to kind of give you like a behind the scenes thing, like with the locker room. Like I know we talked about it on the roundtable with like Kool-Aid and all those guys. Like Monty wouldn't let these guys listen to music if it had swear words in it. JP's like, man, listen to whatever the hell you want. Like, I don't care. Like, at the end of the day, like, you guys have to express yourself. And, like, if you want to listen to music that has swear words in it, go for it. I don't care.
Yeah, that to me that's pretty, that's pretty emblematic of JB Bickerstaff being a better fit for a young locker room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if I'm saying it the nice way, I think that's just emblematic of JB being better fit for a young team. By the way, the Vegas odds came out for the next team, the next suitor for Bradley Beal, and I only bring it up because the Pistons were on that list somehow.
Oh
They have the
God.
Bulls at plus 350, the Pelicans at plus 600, the Kings at plus 600, the Blazers at plus 700, and the Pistons at plus 750.
Oh,
Personally, I don't think any of these make sense at all because I think what those Vegas odds aren't taking into fact is this guy has a no trade clause and can literally pick where his next destination is. But Anthony, does Bradley Beal even make sense in a Pistons uniform? I don't see, especially at this age and this production and that contract. Heck no, stay as far away
I
as
mean,
humanly possible.
we talked about yesterday about players, veteran players, like star players that are, on big contracts. Bradley Beal is like worse than Zach LaVine, in my opinion. At least
Yeah,
Zach LaVine would like be productive and, show out and give you like maybe some hope. Bradley Beal to me at this stage of his career, when he plays, is okay, but he's injured so much. I mean, he just got benched by his coaching staff. Like
yep.
he got benched for a rookie in Ryan Dunn. Mind you, Ryan Dunn is a really, really good rookie. Could defend, and I think a big knock on him coming out of the draft was his 3-point shooting, but he's done a pretty good job at it. But like the fact that you're getting benched for a rookie in Phoenix, and like
He
I
was
think the
supposed to be the third star alongside
yeah,
Devin Booker and Kevin Durant.
I think the fact that he got benched tells you more of like what this coaching staff feels and views him as at this stage of his career. Mind you, that contract is atrocious. Like
Yeah.
no team in their right mind. Oh, the Kings would probably do it. Who am I kidding? The Kings are gonna king. Like
Yeah.
they definitely would probably like trade like DeMar DeRozan to Phoenix probably if if Bradley Beal wanted to go to Sacramento. But like, yeah, man, like keep Bradley Beal far away from this franchise. I know him and Cade have a relationship, but actually kind of scares the shit out of me. Because Bradley Beal always talks really, really high of Cade Cunningham, and he said he's known Cade since he was like in high school, which I was like, please no, because I think that
I
would
mean,
just be an awful fit.
if you were to somehow be able to get some assets, that's one thing.
They
But
don't have any
Phe-
assets.
Phoenix has traded everything in their mother away to go get Kevin Durant. And so and to go get Bradley Beal, which in retrospect, yikes. But nonetheless, that's where they're at. But Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time, man, and for coming on the show. It's always a lot of fun to talk basketball with you. Be sure you go and subscribe to Pistons Talk and follow them on all the social media platforms to get all the content, the memes, the news updates. It's quite a healthy variety and it's good content. So Anthony, appreciate you coming on, man, for real.
No problem, man. I owed you after I don't know how many times you've been on my podcast.
Hey, and I'm willing to come on anytime, man. It's always fun. But thank you to listening as well. Be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel so you're not missing any of the content. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.